On December 12, 2025, a press release from Seoul quietly reshuffled the deck for the global commodities market. Samsung SDI, the battery division of the South Korean tech giant, confirmed the successful validation of their pilot line for mass-producing solid-state batteries with a specific chemical composition, a silver-carbon nanocomposite anode. While the mainstream tech press focused on the 900 watt-hours per liter energy density and the 9-minute charge times, commodity analysts saw something else entirely. They saw a math problem that doesn't have a solution in the current supply chain. According to technical specifications analyzed by materials scientists, this specific battery architecture requires approximately 5 grams of pure silver for every kilowatt-hour of capacity. When you scale that to a standard electric vehicle battery pack, we are looking at nearly 1 kilogram of silver per vehicle. Before we dive into what this demand shock means for the global physical inventory, I need to be clear. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. I am not a financial advisor. All opinions shared are my own and based on publicly available information. Please do your own research before making any financial decisions. What I am documenting today is not just a technological breakthrough. It is a textbook example of a phenomenon commodity historians call the industrial dislocation cycle. This is a pattern that has repeated across multiple cycles in recorded history, usually resulting in violent price repricing when a niche industrial element suddenly becomes the backbone of a mass-market technology. To understand the magnitude of what Samsung just announced, we cannot simply look at the press release. We have to look through an analytical lens. Commodity historians have documented a recurring sequence that happens when technology outpaces supply chains. I call this the 4-stage dislocation pattern, not as a prophecy, but as an analytical framework to help us understand where we are in the cycle. Let me walk you through how this pattern typically unfolds. Stage 1 is usually characterized by the innovation lag. This is when a new technology is developed in a lab using an exotic material, but the market assumes it will never scale because the material is too expensive or too rare. Prices remain dormant because demand is theoretical. Stage 2 emerges when validation hits. This is the moment a major industrial player like Samsung, Toyota, or Tesla commits capital to build factory lines. The demand shifts from theoretical to inevitable. Stage 3 is the inventory squeeze. As the industrial player begins securing strategic stockpiles, the physical float available on exchanges begins to drain, often while the paper price remains suppressed by legacy derivatives. Finally, stage 4 is price discovery. This happens when the industrial user cannot source the metal at the spot price and begins bidding directly against investors, breaking the contract mechanisms of the futures markets. To understand how this pattern plays out in reality, let's examine what happened in the late 1990s and early 2000s during the Great Palladium Shock. This serves as our first historical case study. Most people today know palladium as a precious metal that often trades at a premium to platinum, but in the 1990s it was considered a boring industrial byproduct. In the mid-90s, global emission standards began to tighten significantly. Automakers were under pressure to reduce pollutants from gasoline engines. For decades, platinum had been the primary metal used in catalytic converters. However, engineers at Ford Motor Company and other manufacturers discovered that palladium, which was cheaper at the time, was actually more effective at scrubbing hydrocarbons from exhaust. In the initial phase, which lasted from roughly 1996 to 1998, the innovation lag was in full effect. Engineers knew palladium was superior for this specific use case, but the market hadn't priced it in. Palladium traded quietly under $150 an ounce. It was abundant, and Russia had massive stockpiles from the Soviet era. Then came stage 2, validation. Ford Motor Company, fearing a supply shortage for their new converter designs, made a strategic decision to stockpile the metal. They didn't just buy what they needed for that month. They bought for future production years. Contemporary observers at the time noted that physical deliveries were becoming difficult to secure in London and Zurich. As conditions progressed into the third phase, the inventory squeeze, a geopolitical event accelerated the timeline. Supply disruptions from Russia, the world's primary producer, coincided with this massive new industrial demand. By January 2001, the market hit stage 4. The price did not just rise, it exploded. Palladium went from roughly $150 to over $1,000 an ounce in a parabolic move. The consequences were severe. Ford Motor Company eventually had to write down a $1 billion loss on their precious metals hedging when the price volatility became unmanageable. But the lesson for commodity historians was clear. When a mass-manufactured product, like a car, suddenly requires a fixed amount of a scarce element, the price of that element becomes inelastic. The manufacturer cannot stop buying just because the price goes up. They need the metal to sell the car. Now let's fast forward to a more recent example that is directly relevant to the silver market: the solar photovoltaic boom of the 2010s. This is our second historical validation. At first glance, the circumstances seem different. Solar panels are a different technology than catalytic converters. But when we apply the same analytical framework, the similarities are striking. In the early 2000s, silver was primarily a monetary metal and a photographic metal. The idea that it would become an energy metal was discussed only in niche academic circles. This was the innovation lag. But as governments worldwide began subsidizing green energy, photovoltaic technology moved from the lab to mass production. By 2011, we entered the validation phase. Solar manufacturing exploded in China. Each panel required a silver paste to conduct electricity. At the time, panels were inefficient and used a massive amount of silver per unit. As production ramped up, the industrial consumption of silver began to climb aggressively. However, there is a crucial difference between the palladium case and the solar case, and this difference is vital for our analysis of the Samsung battery. In the solar industry, as the price of silver spiked in 2011, hitting nearly $50, manufacturers initiated a process called thrifting. They invested billions in research to reduce the amount of silver needed per panel. Over the last decade, they successfully reduced silver loadings by nearly 80% per wafer. This is where the counter perspective is critical. Skeptics of the silver thesis often point to this solar example as proof that technology always finds a way to use less metal. They argue that high prices cure high prices, and they are partially right. The solar industry did reduce loading, but here is the catch. Even with 80% thrifting, the total volume of silver used by the solar industry has continued to break records every single year. Why? Because the volume of solar installations grew faster than the thrifting could save metal. In 2024, the solar industry consumed nearly 200 million ounces of silver, almost 20% of annual global supply, despite their efficiency gains. This brings us to the counter-perspective analysis regarding Samsung's new battery. It is intellectually honest to admit that not all analysts agree that this battery tech is a silver price trigger. Some battery chemists argue that the silver-carbon layer is a transitional technology. They point to research into pure silicon anodes or lithium metal anodes that do not use silver at all. They argue that if silver prices rise too high, Samsung and other manufacturers will simply engineer the silver out of the battery, just as solar manufacturers thrifted their paste. These are valid considerations. Markets are adaptive systems. If silver hits $200 an ounce, the economics of a battery containing a kilogram of silver change drastically. Variables that could alter this scenario include the successful commercialization of solid-state batteries that use no anode at all, or a sudden breakthrough in sodium-ion density that makes lithium-ion obsolete for economy cars. However, we must weigh these counter-arguments against the physics of the current breakthrough. The silver-carbon anode is not just a random design choice. It solves the dendrite problem. In solid-state batteries, lithium dendrites, tiny needle-like structures, form during charging and short-circuit the battery. Silver dissolves the lithium evenly, preventing these dendrites. Currently, there is no other known element that performs this specific electrochemical function as effectively as silver. With that context established, let's examine the current situation analysis based on the latest data from December 2025. I want to be clear, we're comparing current technical specifications to historical patterns. According to the technical papers associated with Samsung's pilot line, the AGC, or silver carbon nanocomposite layer, is approximately 5 to 10 micrometers thick. Independent analysis suggests this equates to a silver loading of roughly 5 grams per kilowatt hour. Let's do the math that has the institutional vaults concerned. The average electric vehicle battery pack in North America is approaching 80 to 100 kilowatt hours to alleviate range anxiety. If we use the lower end of the estimates, say 800 grams of silver per vehicle, and apply that to a production run of just 1 million vehicles, the numbers become staggering. 1 million vehicles, which is less than 10% of global EV production, would require 800,000 kilograms of silver. That translates to approximately 25 million ounces. 25 million ounces might sound small in a world where 800 million ounces are mined annually. But we have to look at the marginal ounce. The silver market is currently in its 5th consecutive year of structural deficit, according to data from the Silver Institute. The demand from solar, electronics, and investment already exceeds mine supply and recycling combined. The market has been balancing this deficit by draining above-ground stockpiles in London and New York. If you add a new, inelastic source of demand requiring 25 to 50 million ounces per year, and that's just for 1 million cars, the deficit expands from manageable to critical. If this technology scales to 10 million cars, standardizing across the industry, we are looking at 250 million ounces of new demand. That is a quarter of the entire global mining output, vanishing into car chassis where it cannot be easily recycled for decades. And this is the definition of Stage 3 in our framework, the inventory squeeze. We are already seeing signs of this. On December 12th, concurrent with the battery news, reports from the LBMA indicated that free float inventory, silver not leased or owned by ETFs, has dropped to levels not seen since the 1940s. So, what happens next? Analysts examining similar historical situations have modeled several potential scenarios. I want to emphasize, these are possibilities based on past precedent, not guaranteed predictions. Scenario A is the niche luxury outcome. In this scenario, the cost of silver limits the Samsung solid-state battery to high-end luxury vehicles only, the Porsches and high-end Mercedes of the world. In this case, demand rises by maybe 10 to 15 million ounces. This would support a higher silver floor price but likely wouldn't trigger a systemic squeeze. Scenario B is the industrial pivot. This is the scenario similar to the palladium shock. In this model, the performance benefits of the battery, 900 watt-hours per liter and 9-minute charging, are so valuable that automakers aggressively adopt the tech despite the silver cost. They view the silver cost as a marketing expense to sell a superior car. If this happens, manufacturers will bypass the COMEX and LBMA to secure direct offtake agreements with miners. This would drain the public exchanges of liquidity, potentially leading to a decoupling of the paper price and the physical price, followed by a violent upward reconciliation. Scenario C is the substitution failure. This is the most disruptive scenario. It assumes that Samsung's tech becomes the industry standard, but mining supply fails to react due to the long lead times of building new mines. Historically, it takes 10 years to bring a new silver mine online. If demand spikes in 2026 and new supply can't arrive until 2036, the price mechanism is the only thing that can balance the market. In past cases, this resulted in prices rising multiples of their base level until demand destruction occurred in other sectors. For those studying commodity supply-demand dynamics, here's how professional analysts typically structure their research into this battery development. They don't just read the headlines, they monitor specific signal indicators. First, they watch the thrifting patents. Researchers are actively scanning patent filings from Samsung, Toyota, and Panasonic to see if they are filing new methods to reduce the silver layer thickness. A rise in these patents would signal that the price is becoming a pain point for engineers. Second, they monitor off-take agreements. This is the smoking gun. If we see headlines that a battery manufacturer has signed a 5-year deal to buy silver directly from a mining company like Fresnillo, Pan American Silver, or Hecla, that confirms they are worried about open market availability. We saw this with Tesla and lithium in the early 2020s. Third, they watch the lease rates. When physical metal is in short supply, the cost to lease it rises. If silver lease rates spike while the spot price remains flat, it is a classic divergence signal indicating that the physical market is tight even if the paper market is calm. I want to reiterate, this framework is for educational research only. My role is documenting patterns and presenting analysis, not advising individual financial actions. Anyone considering decisions should consult licensed professionals. We have examined the potential impact of Samsung's silver carbon anode technology through the lens of the industrial dislocation cycle. We have compared it to the palladium shock of 2001 and the solar boom of the last decade. The data suggests that if this battery technology achieves even moderate market penetration, it introduces a massive new demand vector into a market already suffering from structural deficits. Critical acknowledgments remain: markets are unpredictable. A new battery chemistry could be discovered tomorrow that uses iron instead of silver. A global recession could crush auto demand entirely. But as it stands today, the physics of the silver carbon anode present a unique setup. The industry is moving toward a technology that requires a metal it does not have enough of. What is your perspective on this pattern? Do you think the battery industry will find a way to thrift out the silver before mass production? Or are we looking at the next great commodity squeeze? Let me know in the comments. I read and learn from thoughtful responses. Thank you for engaging with this analysis. Stay curious and stay informed.